Russia thought it had it all figured out. Take territory and force your influence on the Ukrainian people. But Ukraine has just slapped Russia upside the head. A massive de-Russification tsunami is sweeping through Ukraine, eradicating Putin's forces as it goes. The occupied lands are being reclaimed. The end of Russia's influence is imminent. Something just began, and there's not a thing that Russia can do to stop it. That something is a push. Deep into the southeast, Ukraine's forces are taking out Russia's soldiers left, right, and center. Grey zones are now being cleared, followed by Ukraine recapturing settlements that Russia thought were safe from liberation. This is a counterattack, yes, and one that is being done to set up a stalwart defense against a Russian offensive that will come in the spring, as you'll learn if you keep watching. But there's something deeper going on. For Ukraine, this isn't just about retaking territory, it's about expelling Russian influence. It's about teaching Putin that no matter how hard he tries, Ukraine is rejecting Russification at every turn. It all started with the grey zones. In traditional terms, a grey zone is any area where hostility is present, but that hostility is below the threshold needed for true state-on-state conflict. Think of the incursions that Russian drones and fighter jets have been making into NATO airspace over the last few months, and you get the idea. But in Ukraine, a grey zone is a little different. It's a region where neither side has true control, though Russia often claims it does. There are isolated pockets of conflict, but the entire idea, at least from the Russian perspective, is to create a murky view of the battlefield that allows Putin to claim propaganda victories related to territory that Russia doesn't actually hold. Russia has been creating these grey zones by sneaking small units behind the Ukrainian front line. Once in, those units dig down and wait, ostensibly for backup, but often for the inevitable death that will arrive when Ukraine's forces catch up to them. Still, chaos reigns in these zones, and they create opportunities for Russia to Russify by claiming that Ukraine can do nothing to stop what Putin tries to tell the whole world is an unstoppable advance. Nothing could be further from the truth, and Ukraine's campaign of de-Russification in the southeast is the perfect example. It all started with the clearing of the grey zones in southeastern Ukraine, as Euromaidan Press reported on February 25th. The operation started about 4 weeks ago, in early February, and it's seen Ukraine complete a very immediate and important goal, clearing the small pockets of Russian infiltrators. Amid the Starlink shutdown that has wreaked havoc among Russia's forces, Ukraine sent out search and destroy squads into the southeast grey zone that separated Russian and Ukrainian forces. Spanning about 30 kilometers or about 18.6 miles from the Ukrainian-controlled settlement of Pokrovska in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast to the town of Huliapola, which is under Russia's control and in the Zaporizhia Oblast, that grey zone was in danger of being Russified if Ukraine did nothing about it. So Ukraine pushed. It searched and destroyed, and now with control over the grey zone established, Ukraine has shifted its goals, no longer solely targeting infiltrators. Ukraine is taking massive steps toward ridding Russian influence from the southeast forever. Ukraine is retaking settlements and territory, a lot of settlements and territory. With the grey zone cleared, the advance could begin, and though Ukraine has retaken several settlements, as we'll go into in a minute, the headliner in all of this is the village of Ternove. Located in Dnipropetrovsk, though close to the borders of both Zaporizhia and Donetsk, Tanova is tiny. It had a population of a little over 300 before it was ruined by the war. Now, thanks to Ukraine's forces, it's a symbol of de-Russification. The first settlement that Ukraine retook in its southeast counteroffensive and the village that set the stage for everything that we've seen since. It all started on February 21st. That's when the Thor Kills 65X account posted images and an account of what happened in Ternove. Units from the 2nd Battalion of Ukraine's 425th Assault Regiment started a push into the settlement. Therein were the entrenched, though limited, members of Russia's 69th Covering Brigade, which had taken control of the settlement just weeks before. The Ukrainian assault didn't last long, it didn't have to. With Russia's forces already in disarray following their communications breakdown, Ukraine completed the de-Russification of Ternove in record time. And with control gained over the settlement, Ukraine set itself up for a deeper push into the southeast, with Berezova landing on the agenda. Ternove was a sign for Russia. As Euromaidan Press points out, Ukraine actively retaking this village was a signal that the grey zone clearing operation has morphed into a new kind of campaign. One that would see Ukraine push Russians out of as many settlements in the southeast as possible, all in service of ridding those settlements of Russian influence and preparing for Putin's renewed campaign of Russification that is anticipated to begin during the spring. It wouldn't be long before Ukraine started pushing deeper. At around the same time as Ukraine's forces had pushed the Russians out of Ternove, Pravda was reporting that Ukraine had also pushed the occupiers back near the settlement of Kalinivska. By February 24th, a mere 3 days after news broke of the liberation of Ternove, Ukraine had liberated 8 settlements in flash assaults that Russia couldn't stop. Radizna, Andriivka, Nechaivka, Ostapivska, and Nova Zaporizhia all fell back into Ukraine's hands, with RBC Ukraine reporting that there had been no evidence of the Russian presence in these settlements for 2 weeks leading up to February 24th. Ternove then may have been the first liberated settlement that we learned about, but it looks like it wasn't the first settlement that Ukraine cleared. What we see here is a campaign to de-Russify settlements that appears to have started alongside the grey zone clearing operation, and in many ways that makes sense. Russia's infiltrators would have chosen the shattered remains of settlements as hiding places. By clearing those infiltrators out, Ukraine was also liberating villages and towns, destroying Russian influence in the southeast as it went. By February 23rd, the commander-in-chief of Ukraine's military, Alexander Syrsky, was reporting that Ukraine had liberated about 400 square kilometers, or around 154 square miles of territory. Keep that figure in mind. I'm going to be coming back to why it's so important in just a few minutes. But for now, what this amounts to for Russia is really simple. 4 months of infiltration had gone down the drain in 3 weeks of Ukraine's de-Russification campaign. That's according to Clément Mollin, who is a French military analyst who mapped out what Ukraine had been doing on February 21st, right on the eve of news breaking about the liberation of so many of Ukraine's southeastern settlements. Mollin reported that a combination of satellite imagery and confirmation of a massive increase in Ukraine's shelling of Russia's positions confirmed that clearing had turned into de-Russification. Mollin noted 3,000 additional shelling incidents in the Ternova direction, which amounted to Ukraine regaining control of most of the defensive line that it had held in that sector back in 2022. An anti-tank ditch, barbed wire and dragon's teeth came back to Ukraine, offering the foundation for fortifications that will tear through Russia in the spring. Using maps of artillery and airstrikes, Mollin demonstrated that Ukraine has indeed advanced and that Russia is in retreat in the southeast. Russia's artillery strikes have practically stopped, which is a clear indication that the forces it had stationed in the settlements that Ukraine has liberated are no longer in range. In other words, they've been pushed back and Ukraine keeps on firing. This situation largely benefits Ukraine. Russia lost in 3 weeks at least 4 months of infiltrations far behind the lines, Mollin says, adding, "This will buy time to better Pokrovsk defenses, as well as the H-15 highway leading to Zaporizhia." Mollin caps off his report by claiming that more is coming. Using a handy map, he draws a white line that shows how deep he believes that Ukraine will push as it de-Russifies the southeast. That white line is already loaded with barbed wire, meaning Ukraine's goal now will be to gain full control over it so that it can both expand its defenses and push the grey zone deeper into territory that Russia thought it held. This isn't any old counteroffensive by Ukraine. It's the broad reshaping of the battlefield that has happened in large part because of the communication breakdown that has racked Russia's military. Before we dig deeper into that, you are watching The Military Show. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. Ukraine's campaign of southeastern de-Russification kicked off in early February because that is the precise time that Elon Musk and SpaceX finally decided to do something about the illicit Starlink terminals that Russia has been using to coordinate its assaults. These smuggled terminals have been in use all across the 700-mile front line, Euromaidan press reports, and Russia had been using them to coordinate its units and even conduct drone strikes. All that disappeared in the wake of the Starlink shutdown. And to make matters worse, no less than Putin himself decided days later that it would be a good idea to restrict access to the social media app Telegram. In his desire to maintain his own influence, Putin kicked his soldiers off the one communication channel that they could use that would have a chance of filling at least some of the gap that the loss of Starlink left behind. Russia's military was, and still is, in shambles. Command centers could no longer coordinate assaults. Infiltrators who had bedded into the grey zones lost contact with their backup. Russia's assault units got lost, scared. All they could do was wait around, hoping that help would come as they heard Ukraine's drones drawing closer. Without Starlink, Russia's entire southeastern line collapsed, and Ukraine took full advantage. 8 settlements and counting have been liberated. The occupied lands have been reclaimed. De-Russification can begin. If this were a game of chess, Putin's decision to snatch Telegram away right after Starlink was lost would be akin to taking your queen and just tossing it away. The king is now exposed, lost and cornered as Ukraine's pieces advance. There's an old joke that you should never play chess with a pigeon. Why? Because the pigeon will kick all of the pieces off the board, take a dump on it, and then strut away, acting like it won. Putin seems to have taken that joke as literal advice when determining his strategy. His soldiers and his influence are now dying in Ukraine's southeast as a result. What we're saying here is that Putin made a bad situation for Russia even worse by making the dumbest decision that he's made so far in the war. And now, what we're seeing in the southeast is a result of that decision. Earlier we asked you to keep Siersky's remarks about Ukraine taking 400 square kilometers of territory back from Russia in mind. The reason is that this number is special. While Russian forces run around like headless chickens, Ukraine's de-Russification campaign in the southeast has seen it making the most significant gains since August 2024, which is when Ukraine's forces launched a counteroffensive into Russia's Kursk region. Euromaidan Press highlights this, noting that we can combine the territory that Ukraine has retaken in the southeast with the territory that it liberated in Kupyansk toward the end of December, all of which adds up to a terrible start to 2026 for Russia's forces. What Putin thought was safe is now in Ukraine's hands, and it doesn't look like Russia is going to be able to reoccupy what Ukraine has liberated anytime soon. That's the entire point of de-Russification. And we're going to explore some of the many other things that Ukraine has been doing to rid itself of Russia's influence outside of the battlefield toward the end of the video. First, it's worth focusing on what happened in Kupyansk, as that town was something of a precursor to the campaign that Ukraine has launched in the southeast. Back in November 2025, Russia made the bold claim that it had taken Kupyansk. It repeated that claim in mid-December, and we say that it was a bold claim because Russia hadn't actually taken Kupyansk. The city had been close to falling into Russia's hands due to the infiltration strategy we mentioned earlier, but Ukraine certainly hadn't lost it by December. Quite the opposite. Ukraine's forces were actively ridding the city of Russia's soldiers as Putin and his cronies crowed about their control over Kupyansk. By December 1st, Ukraine had shattered the Russian narrative in Kupyansk, which is in the Kharkiv region. Far from falling to Russia, the city had been practically liberated by Ukraine. The country's forces held 90% of the city by the same period in December that saw Russia claiming to have taken control. Ukraine has pushed on in the Kupyansk direction since then. According to Euromaidan Press, Ukraine's forces have retaken at least 183 square kilometers, or about 70.6 square miles, in the Kupyansk direction between December 11th and 25th, which adds to all of the territory that it's liberated in the southeast during February. If the liberation of Kupyansk was symbolic on the de-Russification front, as seen when Ukraine put an exclamation point on what it had achieved by raising the country's flag in the center of the city, what Ukraine has been doing in the southeast serves as much of a practical purpose as a symbolic one. Ukraine is preparing for something. On February 9th, the Kyiv Post reported that Ukrainian and international observers all agreed that Russia has been trying to accumulate strategic reserves that it intends to use for a large-scale assault against Ukraine in the eastern and southern regions of the country. Part of this offensive will focus on Donetsk, where Russia is trying to push past Pokrovsk and toward the fortress belt. However, Russia will also send troops, likely as part of a supporting attack in the summer, toward the major cities of Zaporizhia and/or Kyiv. Those supporting forces may head in that direction to divert Ukraine away from Donetsk, though Putin will also be very happy if his soldiers are also able to capture these two cities. Ukraine's southeastern campaign of de-Russification takes on a different complexion with this knowledge. As Euromaidan Press points out, Russian troops planned for the spring-summer 2026 offensive must now first fight to re-establish defensive positions, then regain lost ground. Only then can they launch planned operations in the spring or summer. What Ukraine has achieved, beyond ridding at least 8 of its southeastern settlements of Russia's influence, is forcing a hard reset of Russia's strategy. Before any assault can be launched to distract Ukraine's forces away from Donetsk, Russia will first have to feed more of its soldiers into Ukraine's defenses, simply to reclaim territory that it had gained over the 4 months leading into February. And remember, Ukraine is reinforcing its defenses in the liberated territories. It's creating kill zones packed with drones, anti-tank defenses, and artillery ambush points, which means that Russia will have to work much harder to reclaim what Ukraine has liberated than it did just a few short months ago. Russia may be planning to distract Ukraine with a spring push into the southeast, but the reality may end up being that Putin has to sacrifice reserves that he intended to use in Donetsk just to get Russia back into the same position that it had in January. What we've seen in the southeast is a process of de-Russification that began a long time ago, only accelerated to an extent that Putin never expected. As Le Monde reports, Ukraine has been trying to rid itself of Russia's lingering influence long before Putin launched his full-scale invasion. That campaign began with the Maidan Revolution of 2014, the outlet says, and it has accelerated significantly since Putin's forces invaded in February 2022. And while every liberated settlement is a tangible battlefield manifestation of Ukraine's desire to de-Russify, there is plenty going on in the country that shows us how it's crafting a new identity that will ultimately see it free itself of the Soviet shackles that have for so long held it back. Chatham House provides more information, noting that the period between the Maidan Revolution and Putin's invasion had seen Ukraine make some interesting strides. Ukraine was steadily consolidating its sovereignty in educational, language, media, religious domains, the outlet says. with a pair of highlights coming in 2019. That's the year that Ukraine restored the independence of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine from Russia, in addition to being the year when Ukraine passed a new law mandating the use of the Ukrainian language in all education, media, and public administration settings. Every single one of these actions sent a jolt through Putin. Russia's leader could feel his influence waning, and that's likely a huge reason why he launched his invasion in the first place. But all that Putin has really achieved in 4 years of war is strengthening the Ukrainian desire for true sovereignty. Every scrap of territory that Ukraine liberates, including all that it's just retaken in the southeast, is a reminder to Putin that Ukraine doesn't want Russia in its country. On the more symbolic front, Ukraine's non-combatants are also pushing to rid their country of Russian influence, even as Putin sends more soldiers to their deaths against Ukraine's defenses. For instance, October 2025 brought with it a push within Ukraine to get rid of the kopeck coin, which is a piece of Russian currency that remains in circulation in Ukraine. As Andriy Pishny, who is the chief of Ukraine's national bank, put it at the time, the kopeck is a piece of Moscow that remains in our pockets, on our price tags, and most importantly, in our heads. This is the real Ukraine. Putin may try to deny it, he may try to tell anybody willing to listen that most in Ukraine want to be controlled by Russia. But time and time again, Ukraine's own people, from its soldiers to its civilians, prove Putin wrong. If Ukraine wanted Russification, it wouldn't have spent 4 years fighting tooth and nail to stop Russia in its tracks. And now, as Ukraine liberates more territory than it has in years, we're seeing the push against Putin's influence enter a new stage. The total de-Russification offensive has begun, and it signals Ukraine fighting harder against Russia than it ever has before. Ironically, Ukraine may be getting help in the fight for de-Russification from the most unexpected source of all, Putin. As Ukraine eradicates Russian influence from its own land, Putin's Ukraine war tunnel vision is leading him to make decisions that are destroying the identity of Russia itself. You can find out more if you check out our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you're subscribed to the Military Show so that you're always among the first to see our analysis of what's really happening in Ukraine. And thank you as always for watching.